Howdy folks, how we doing? I'm the Reverend Danny Crosby, a Unitarian minister serving congregations in Altrincham and in Urmston in the northwest of England. I do hope you're finding the love and that you're witnessing the blessings in life in these difficult times. It's hard at times, my friends, I do know that, but we're all in this together. I'm offering these devotions as my little bit of hope, doing what I can, playing my role, being a part of the solution. The devotions are offered as a balm for the heart, for the mind, for the spirit and the soul. And the title for today's reflection is anything sacred anymore? So I invite us to still ourselves. Let's invite a loving presence to be here amongst us and to awaken from deep, deep within us. I've lit the flame of freedom in the cup of belonging, acceptance, and of love. To worship is to stand in awe under a heaven of stars, before a flower, a leaf in sunlight, or a grain of sand. To worship is to work with dedication and with skill. It is to pause from work and to listen to a strain of music. Worship is loneliness seeking communion. It is a thirsty land crying out for rain. Worship is the mystery within us reaching out to the mystery beyond. It is an inarticulate silence yearning to speak. It is the window of the moment open to the sky of the eternal. I, like most folk with a heart, lament at life at times, at our inhumanity to one another. It's easy to get caught up in the despair. It's easy to see only what is wrong, where the pain is. I have heard from time to time a phrase resurfacing in my heart once again. Is nothing sacred anymore? Does matter really matter? Does anything matter? We see violence and threats and violence. People treat us as somehow less than others because of their skin tone, their gender, their age, their infirmity. A powerful example being the Black Lives Matter movement. That these lives do matter and that it's not being recognised. People have been seen as merely commodities, a means to an end, to something else. Some folk considered superior to others, the horror of supremacist views of all kinds coming to the fore much more loudly again, being heard more and more. People considered as merely numbers on a graph or a spreadsheet, not precious loved ones, expendable because they are not an ideal or seen as useful anymore. This bothers me intensely. And I know I'm not alone in being disturbed by this. It's nothing new either. I know that too. It has always disturbed me that some life is considered of greater worth than others. During these weeks of lockdown, I have heard talk from time to time that some folk are expendable because of age or infirmity, that it would be not only acceptable but advantageous to sacrifice some people for some perceived greater good, that end justifying the means type of language again. I've even heard it said that this is some kind of natural culling, that it will lift a burden from society. There has been talk once more again of eugenics too, although to be fair, this talk was resurfacing before the current coronavirus COVID-19 crisis. I know that people would not want to utter the word eugenics, but it's been heard and it's been reheard, and certainly what is behind the word has been said and heard louder and louder, more and more frequently. We may not utter the word, but the feeling's there. Eugenics came to prominence during the later years of the 19th century. It proposed the elimination of undesirable traits through selective breeding and the sterilisation of inferior human specimens. Eugenics was driven in part by fears that modern institutions had set aside the beneficial aspects of natural selection. Eugenicists continually played on the spectre of weak and sickly humans beings preserved through modern medicine, hygiene and charitable institutions, while the more intelligent and supposedly better human beings were beginning to voluntarily restrict their reproduction, which they claimed was producing biological degeneration. They proposed the introduction of artificial selection by restricting the reproduction of so-called inferior people and encouraging the superior to procreate. They proposed marriage restrictions, compulsory sterilisation, and sometimes even involuntary euthanasia for the disabled who were deemed biologically inferior. It stressed racial inequality, promoting racist ideologies. Many biologists, anthropologists, and physicians considered black Africans or American Native Americans less evolved than white Europeans. These are attitudes that have remained long after eugenics became a dirty word, by the way. People still hold such views. Now, the most grotesque manifestation of eugenics was found in Hitler's National Socialism. Nazism endorsed discrimination, ultimately death for those with allegedly inferior biological traits, claiming it would promote evolutionary advance for the human species by fostering higher reproductive levels for those considered superior biologically. Hitler's regime murdered about 200,000 disabled Germans, 6 million of Europe's Jewish people, and hundreds of thousands of the Roma people, commonly called gypsies, still are, by the way, in their effort to what they saw as improving the human race. It was thought that with the defeat of Nazism that eugenic ideology died with it. Certainly the word became dirty, and yet supremacist ideas have remained, and talk of eugenics has resurfaced once again in recent months. Racist and discriminatory ideologies have not gone away. They're getting louder again, actually. They are with us today, and talk of eugenics are back with us too. Now, Professor Richard Dawkins recently got himself into trouble for a tweet suggesting that, in theory, exploring such ideas were possible. He wrote, "It's one thing to deplore eugenics on ideological, political, moral grounds. It's quite another to conclude that it wouldn't work in practice. Of course it would. It works for cows, horses, pigs, dogs and roses. Why on earth wouldn't it work for humans? Facts. Ignore ideology." Now, as you can imagine, there was a huge backlash. And to be fair to Professor Dawkins, to be fair to him, he wasn't suggesting it was morally okay to follow such an idea, just that it was possible. Many responded and criticised him on moral grounds, but also on biological and scientific grounds too. The following by David Curtis, a psychiatrist and geneticist at University College London, being one example. He tweeted in reply to Professor Dawkins, "People who support eugenics initiatives are evil racists. Also, modern genetic research shows that eugenics would not work." There have been whiffs of eugenic planning in public policy too, an example being the resignation of one of the Prime Minister's advisors, Andrew Siniski, who in 2014 had suggested that compulsory contraception would eliminate a permanent underclass. He wrote, "One way to get around the problems of unplanned pregnancies creating a permanent underclass would be to legally enforce universal uptake of long-term contraception on the onset of puberty." And there have been other whiffs of eugenics in other public policy places too. The government advisor Dominic Cummings has offered some controversial opinions on the use of IVF treatment within the National Health Service. And then there is other talk. Talk I have heard, okay, in whispers, but talk still the same, of the value of some lives during this health crisis that we've been living through. Those that speak of the lives of the elderly and the infirm somehow being of less value, and that the young and healthy are not under threat from the virus. I have heard it said, why should their lives be put on hold? We need to open up everything and keep on progressing ever onward. I have to say such talk has troubled me more than anything else actually these last few weeks. It bothers me greatly that some life is valued above other lives. Is nothing sacred anymore? It matters how we view life. It matters how we view one another. If we reduce one life and all life to a meaningless nothing, then really, where do we find our moral compass? Surely then anything goes. If nothing is sacred, where do we find our moral compass? What stops ideas like eugenics from developing once again? And some of the horrors of the 20th century resurfacing again. Or maybe they're there all the time. We hear it, ethnic cleansing in China and places like that. It's gone on for a long time. I've recently been reading Viktor Frankl again. I recommend anything by him to everybody. Read Viktor Frankl. Please, if you're going to read anything in your life, read Viktor Frankl. Now, one thing I read was a collection of lectures that he delivered less than a year after his liberation from Auschwitz, and before he wrote his classic Man's Search for Meaning. The following quotation speaks powerfully of the dangers of reductionism and how it can lead to dehumanizing activity. Here he is commenting on the way that the thinking prevalent in Europe in those early days of the 20th century had helped prepare the way for the Nazi atrocities. He stated, "If we present a man with a concept of man which is not true, we may well corrupt him. When we present man as an automaton of reflexes, as a mind machine, as a bundle of instincts, as a pawn of drives and reactions, as a mere product of instinct, hereditary and environment, we feed the nihilism to which modern man is, in any case, prone." I became acquainted, Frankl continued, with the last stage of that corruption in my second concentration camp, Auschwitz. The gas chambers of Auschwitz were the ultimate consequence of the theory that man is nothing but the product of hereditary and environment, or as the Nazis like to say, of blood and soil. I am absolutely convinced that the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Treblinka and Majdanek were ultimately prepared not in some ministry or other in Berlin, but rather at the desks in the lecture halls of nihilistic scientists and philosophers. For Frankl, once life becomes meaningless, then nihilism follows, and then any horror is possible. Any can be justified. For me, life is a very sacred thing. That's why I've come to believe that everything matters. Every thought, every feeling, every word, and every deed we do. Everything we do and everything we do not do really does matter. For if matter does not matter, then anything goes. I'm going to share with you a lovely little poem called This Body by Kayla Parker. This body is not what it was. I got shin splints from running today. 10 years ago, all I get was smelly feet. My back aches just from sitting these days. In my youth, All my pain came from climbing trees. This body is not what it was, not some alien thing thrust upon me, so clumsy always in the way. I know it and move it, it's like it's mine. Didn't say I never walk into walls from time to time. This body is not what it will be when the sagging of old age sets in and simple backaches are fond memories. So I'll take and enjoy what it is right now. Not yet frail from old age, but sometimes awkward and weak. Really, it suits what's inside quite nicely. This body is not what it was, or what it will be. And thankfully, right now, it seems to just fit me. I like the poem, and it brings to mind some of the ideas explored by Frankl in those series of lectures I recently read. He spoke of how meaning is found even when we lose most of what we see as vital to our lives. Before the war, Frankl had worked on reducing suicide among students at his university. It'd been a great success, reduced it to virtually zero in his time. He showed how meaning can be found even as we lose so much of what once gave us our greatest purpose. He gave countless examples of people losing so much and yet still finding meaning in life. In fact, some people found their greatest meaning during the last days of life. I am sure we've all experienced this in many ways these last few weeks, actually. We can find meaning and sacredness even in the darkest moments of life, even when everything we thought gave us meaning is taken away. Frankl spoke particularly powerfully against prevailing attitudes towards disabilities of all kinds. Something where some progress in life has been made these last decades, I think. I remember as a child growing up that most people with disabilities, whether they were mental or physical, were kept hidden from society. So there is progress. We have progressed in many areas in such attitudes, but there's a long way to go. And this talk of people being expandable that's getting louder and louder really troubles me. Who decides what's of value and meaning in life? Who gets to decide that? Who do they think they are? Now, as I was reading Frankl, I remembered a sermon delivered by the Reverend Bill Darlison at the valedictory service at Unitarian College, Manchester. I think it would be about 2012. I was really moved by the sermon that he delivered, and I asked him for a copy of it at the time. I think I might use some of this at some point in the future. Well, it's taken me 8 years, but here's an extract from it. Bill said, do you remember the book, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly? It was written by Jean-Dominique Bauby in 1998. The author had a stroke which completely paralysed him. He could only move one eyelid, but he contrived to write this book, called by the Financial Times reviewer one of the great books of the century. Operating under that severe impediment, Barbie said, as so many have said before and since, that only in adversity did he find out the meaning of love. Are we ready for love, for genuine, deep, aching, draining, heartbreaking love? Or do we seek to escape the pains of it all as we get on with our life? Adversity makes men. Prosperity makes monsters, wrote Victor Hugo. I don't want to be a burden on anyone. Maybe sometimes, actually, it's our duty to be a burden on people, just to stop them becoming monsters. Bill also quoted an address delivered in 1983 by the Russian novelist Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He spoke of the dangers inherent in societies which had lost all sense of the ultimate value of the individual. Solzhenitsyn said, over half a century ago, while I was still a child, I recall hearing a number of older people offer the following explanation for the great disasters that had befallen Russia. Men had forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. Since then I have spent well nigh 50 years working on the history of our revolution. In the process I have read hundreds of books, collected hundreds of personal testimonies, and have already contributed 8 volumes of my own towards the effort of clearing away the rubble left by that upheaval. But if I were asked today to formulate as concisely as possible the main cause of the ruinous revolution that swallowed some 60 million of our people, I would not put it more accurately than to repeat: men have forgotten God. That's why all this happened. And Bill added to the Solzhenitsyn quotation. Solzhenitsyn, I am sure, doesn't want us all to become conventional theists. He wants us to rediscover and affirm that sense of transcendence, of meaning and of purpose, which for a variety of reasons we seem to be in danger of losing, if we haven't lost it already. This is the 21st century's most important task for believer and non-believer alike, to find a new language of holiness in a world consumed by the trivial, the crass and the hedonistic, to reaffirm the sacredness of human beings at a time when we are increasingly being told we are ephemera living in an indifferent universe. I'm glad I managed to find use for those words by Bill, because they hit me hard and they still hit me hard. Thank you. I have a mantra. You may have heard it, but that's mantras for you. You hear them a lot. I say them a lot. I say, and I'm not going to stop saying it, I'm going to keep saying it till you start to listen. I say, everything matters or nothing matters. Either everything is sacred or nothing is sacred. Either everything has meaning or everything is meaningless. We are all part of the one human family, the family of life. When we no longer recognise this, we begin to fail to acknowledge one another's sacred mystery. We begin to separate one another. We begin to dehumanise. We are not all exactly the same. We have different qualities, different characteristics, different gifts to offer, as well as different needs. That said, we are all made of the same substance, the very same substance that the whole universe is made of, or at least the matter we have knowledge of. And I believe this powerfully, I believe it more and more each day, I believe that the same spirit runs through all life. I do not personally believe that this same spirit controls all of life, but it's certainly present, always there offering the lure of its love. I believe it is our task to choose this love, because if we do not, then we will begin to separate and alienate. And I believe that it is this that causes the distrust and the fear that leads to hatred and dehumanizing violence. The solution is simple. Solutions usually are, you know. The solution is a reawakening to this sense of sacredness of all life, all existence, to fill life with meaning, to make life meaningful. You see, either everything matters or nothing matters. Either everything is sacred or nothing is sacred. Either everything has meaning or everything is meaningless. What do you believe? What do you believe? Because it matters, it really does. Do you believe that everything ought to be sanctified? Or do you believe that life is devoid of any meaning at all? What's your choice? What's your decision? What do you believe? Because it matters, you know. It really does. The whole world's in our hands. I'm going to end this reflection with a few words of blessing. We need desperately to bless more. And we all bless. We can all bless. We bless by giving our whole hearts to life. So let's begin right here, right now. Let's give our whole hearts to life. Some final words of blessing. May the Spirit of love open our eyes. May it shine light even in our darkest of days. May we recognise the sacredness of one another and the sacredness of all life, in all time and in all spaces and places. May we experience the thickening of all time so that we can feel those thin places in life. May we bring this sacred vision with us, and may we do so in all that we feel, in all that we think, in all that we say, in all that we do. Matter really matters. You matter. I matter. Everything matters. Let's sanctify matter. Amen.